Our second annual festival. I'm Amy Cummins, and I get to introduce the introducer today, but I first wanted to thank all of you for coming, and to thank the librarians, including Dylan over there, for putting on such a wonderful program that is free for the public and celebrates literacy. Now I'm going to turn it over to Bianca Blanco, who's going to introduce our three panelists. Then we're going to hear from David Bowles and Sarah Cortez and David Bryce. And you're going to have a chance to ask questions. So I hope you might have some questions today. Okay, Bianca, come on up. Yeah, Bianca.
No, just we're going to answer questions. Just introductory remarks.
Okay, I don't think I need the microphone, but... Okay, so let me go ahead and introduce our first author. His name is David Bowles. And David Bowles spent his childhood split between South Carolina and the Rio Grande Valley, eventually getting his bachelor's, master's, and doctorate's degrees from UTPA. Yay! His first book was The Seed, and that was released in 2011. And in 2012, he published Bestiario Mexicano, a bilingual catalog of legendary beasts. Top Shelf, David's weekly book review column, appears each Friday in The Monitor, so be sure that you look out for that. And his young adult fantasy novel, The Smoky Mirror, was released in the spring of 2015. His most recent book is Border Lore, and that would be David Bowles.
David Bowles!
Our next writer, Sarah Cortez, lives, works, and polices in Houston, Texas. In 1999, she won the Penn Texas Literary Award in poetry. Her first book of poetry was entitled How to Undress a Cop. She has edited 5 volumes and been awarded the Skipping Stones Honor Award for her editing of Windows into My World, Latino Youth Write Their Lives. Her recent edited volumes are Indian Country Noir, Hit List, The Best of Latino Mystery, and You Don't Have a Clue, Latino Mystery Stories for Teens, and also an anthology of poetry of pre-cartel Mexico, about pre-cartel Mexico, entitled Goodbye Mexico, Poems of Remembrance. So let's give a hand to Sarah. And last but certainly not least, we have David Bryce, who is a Texas State graduate and EdCouch native. Bryce is the author of Give the Pig a Chance and Other Stories, Heart-Shaped Cookies and Other Stories, which I have here, and also Crazy Logo, which earned the American Library Association's Best Books for Young Readers Award in 2001. His work appears in 5 anthologies and has been nominated for the Tomas Rivera Mexican American Children's Book Award and the Pura Beltre Award. He splits his time between writing short stories about growing up and living in the Rio Grande Valley, mentoring and teaching students at EdCouch Elsa High School, and helping advise and grow Cine Las Americanas Media Arts Center in Austin. So that was David Bryce. All right. So now I will go ahead and give it to Dr. Cummins.
We're going to hear from each author who's going to speak for a few minutes, and then we'll be able to have questions and answers. So Dr. David Bowles first.
Awesome. Okay. Can we talk? Should we talk from where we're sitting? Is that better?
Well, can people hear you okay?
Can you guys hear me okay? I'm pretty sure. I've got a very, very loud voice, so I've always been gifted with that, or my wife would probably disagree and see it as a curse, not as a gift. Yeah, I'm very loud. So, it's really great to be back at this festival. Last year we had a great time. It's one of the exciting things in the literary movement in Texas, especially in the Rio Grande Valley, to see so many authors coming down to the Rio Grande Valley, and then so many authors from this area also attending the festival and sharing their work. So it's great just to be here as a participant and as an attendee as well. My work that has been kind of summed up is usually centered around the Mexican-American experience. I come from a kind of mixed heritage background. My dad's half Mexican-American, and my mom's from an Anglo family. And so I grew up with, in the Mexican-American culture here in the Rio Grande Valley, although my dad was in the Navy, so we lived in South Carolina for a few years in my childhood. And when I became a middle school teacher, in Donna, Texas, I started working with struggling readers. And it was then that I realized that my plans of being, of writing the great American novel and being like the next Ernest Hemingway needed to kind of be set aside so that I could concentrate on doing things that would, bridge the gap between the oral cultures that my kids came from and the literate culture that I wanted them to embed themselves in. So I started taking the stories that I'd grown up with, the stories that my grandmother Garza and my uncle Joe Casas on his ranch and my aunts when they were doing tamaladas in the kitchen, the stories that we grew up hearing, especially the scary stories, because that's really what my kids wanted to hear, and like recasting them as short stories in the classroom. Because I was an English teacher after all, I needed to teach dialogue and setting and characterization and all of that. So this is really where my serious work as a writer began, setting aside my own desire for myself and looking at what my community needed and trying to provide that to them. And there were people that had already blazed that trail before me, and so because of the work of people like David Rice and other authors, I was able to find a little niche of scarier, more fantastic settings and do the kind of work that had been done before, but from that angle. And, my kids ate it up when I would write these stories for them in the classroom and teach them how to go do ethnography with their family, get those stories from their abuelos and tias and retell them in their own words and on their own terms. This gave birth to my first collection, the Seed Stories from the River's Edge, then to Mexican Bestiary, which was that bilingual encyclopedia of creepy crawly creatures, and to other collections like the Creature Feature series that I've done for the Monitor, which led to Border Lore, which is out from Lamar University Press. And in being involved in all of that, of course, as a father, I'm raising 3 children, and we're reading things together. And like me, they're really into science fiction and fantasy and all that kind of quirky stuff. So, when they're really little, I read to them the Chronicles of Narnia and the Lord of the Rings, and we read like Harry Potter together. And I even made the sacrifice of reading the Twilight series with my first daughter, which was really, really painful. But we read together. And one of the things that I was always disappointed by in all this reading was, hey, we typically have a group of white young people who are facing off against monsters from European tradition or from Greek and Roman gods or whatever it happens to be. And I really wanted, kind of like on the heels of the work I had done retelling scary legends, to take that YA fantasy framework and plug some Chicano teens into it and have them facing off against like Aztec and Mayan gods. And I also wanted to show maybe a slightly different group of Latinos, Mexican Americans, than is often portrayed in like mainstream, if you could say mainstream Chicano YA fiction. Seems kind of funny to say it that way, but I wanted to write about middle class Mexican Americans in the Rio Grande Valley who have relatives in Mexico and who have they're not living in a barrio, they're not they're never migrant workers or whatever. Their existence is a little bit different, but they have. There's validity to that identity and a space for it that kids who grow up in those kinds of households need to see themselves as well in Latino writing. So that basically gave birth to my series, Garza Twins, and the first book of which is The Smoking Mirror. So really excited about being on this panel with these really, really great writers that I admire and fielding some of your questions about some of the crazy stuff I just ran my way through.
Yay! Next.
Yeah.
Okay, as you heard, my name is Sarah Cortez. I'm from Houston. I'm a native Houstonian. My family actually has been in Texas for about 6 generations. All the folks on both sides of my family, my mom's and my dad's, came from Spain. And when they came from Spain, they were all men, as was typical in the 19th century, and they started falling in love with these gorgeous Sioux Indian women, French women, Apache women, and so on and so forth. So my family has been in Texas a very, very long time. And on my mother's side, her dad, in fact, was the head of the school board in his small town of Floresville, Texas, near San Antonio. Yeah, Floresville. And my father's side of the family, they were from near Castile, Spain. In fact, my dad had the most gorgeous light green eyes I have ever seen in my life, and was very pale complected. And his mom's family were shrimpers, and they lived near Matagorda. So all of this combined after World War II, which my dad served in, and my mother worked for the State Department in Laredo, Texas. My dad and mom had gotten married during World War II, and he told her, you know, this was very wise, I think. He told her after the war, he says, we can move to any large city, fairly large-sized city in Texas that neither one of us have family living in already. Because he wanted to really let them forge a new existence as a couple and as a family. And so they moved to Houston, which is where I was born. Let me just talk to you very briefly about my dream to become a writer, because I hope it's a dream every single person in this room has. Whatever your age, whatever your language, whatever your life experiences, I hope that you dream about being up here with one day on a panel of your own and having books that have your name on the spine, because I think that is the most precious dream in the world. It certainly was mine. And I started dreaming that dream when I was a very young child. My mother was a school teacher. So, you know, anybody here have a mom who's a school teacher? Oh, lucky you. Lucky you. Or a dad. Or a dad who's a school teacher. No, you just are a school teacher. So anyway, but, we're so lucky to have these people who perform incredible public service in our community, such as police officers, teachers, and so forth, the postmen and postwomen. But teachers specifically change your lives. And I bet everybody in here can raise their hand and say, my life at some point was changed by a teacher. And so my mom, when she started teaching me to read and write, I was 3 years old. She made her books. She sewed them on the sewing machine. She got that big, white, stiff paper and cut out pictures from picture books. And she had elementary school teacher's beautiful printing, and she made short sentences there at the bottom. And somehow, those words and the fact that you could take all these lines and make a word and have that word mean something. Hello means something very different than bye or goodbye, right? Anyway, that whole magic just swept me, and it swept me along so far that I became scared of its power. I became scared to fail because it was my most precious, precious dream. So I did not major in the English language. I do not have a single writing degree. I put off studying writing until I was about 37 years old. And that's when I took my first writing course. I'm not going to tell you how old I am now. You can guess from the internet, info on the internet. But thankfully, I now have, I've edited 7 books. I have written 3 of my own, some of which are for sale with all of our other books at the hard-to-find bookstore next door. I have 3 more books under contract. I spend my life writing and editing, meaning I work with other writers to help them make their work better. And I'm so glad I took the risk of failing to be a writer, because if I hadn't been able somehow through the grace of the good Lord to take that risk, I never would have done what I've done. So I'll stop speaking, but I just want to encourage everyone, if you have that precious fire in your heart to be a writer, to use words, please figure out some way to follow that dream.
Yay. Yeah.
Yay.
David Rice from McAllen. So when I was a kid, my father would drive. We worked in McAllen, so we would drive from McAllen to McAllen. This is like I'm 51. So this is like like 75, what I, 76. And I would tell my dad, hey, can I go with you? I want to go to McAllen so I can go to the library. It was on Main Street, you know, right there, right? So he would drop me off to the library, and I'd go in there and just hang out for like 4 hours or 5 hours there, just walking around. And that's where it starts, okay? It starts at home with your parents, right? But it starts at school, and it starts at a library. Now, you guys who brought your kids here today, and you guys who are writers yourselves, this is the best place to write. It really is. I mean, I would go 30 miles just to come to the library. We didn't have one in Couch, Texas. We have one in Elsa now. And then when I got older, I worked in the library for 4 years. I was a shelver in Austin Public Library. And now look at this. I've never been in this library. And this is where it happens. This learning process of books and writing creativity occur where there is creativity around you. So I want to say to you, first of all, that you already have a place to write. You know, I didn't have a computer until I was like, you know, I don't know, 32. You know, I just would go to the library and use a computer there. I would take my disc there. And this is our money that built this. These are our funds, and we have to maximize it. So the first thing is, you want to be a writer? That's great. I like the idea. You want to write? That's fantastic. Go to your public library. Maximize it, utilize it, and study in it. It's the best environment for it. Got it? That make sense? Yes?
Yeah.
I'm done. Okay.
I love it.
Yeah.
I have a question, but then we'll turn it over to questions from any of us. But I wanted to comment that each of these writers is very noteworthy because they've done so much to help the careers of other writers for children and teens and adults. For example, David Rice, your book, Give the Pig a Chance, came out 20 years ago. And, well, it's like 19 and a half. And you did so much to pave
You're
the way
freaking
for
old, in other words.
other writers from the Rio Grande Valley. They always talk about David Rice and how much just seeing his stories has meant to them, and your work with movie production companies that you brought movies to the valley. You know, that's amazing. David Bowles, you publish through VAO Publishing, and you have gotten the works of so many other people into print: prose, poetry, photography, memoir, nonfiction. You've done so much to help other writers. And Sarah, you too, with your collections like this one, you've published so many other poets and story writers and helped them either to get started or to continue their careers. And I just think it's really cool that the three people in this panel are all so noteworthy, not only for their own achievements, but for what they've done for others. So I guess my question is kind of how you balance this, like how do you balance coming up with your own stuff, getting it out there, with also helping other people too? Any comments on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to balance it, and there are times when you overdo it and you you have to pull back, and sometimes, you know, you feel really guilty about it because you've gotten people accustomed to your support, and there's times when you have to kind of dial it back a little bit because your own career, you know, waxes and wanes, and when it's on the rise, and you're like Sarah and I are both under contract for 3 books at present, so it's like, okay, now I'm going to have to like ease back a little bit off of some of the stuff that I'm doing. But I think it's really important because I think each of us, I mean, I don't necessarily know the stories. I think each of us owes a debt of gratitude to somebody who helped us get our foot in the door as well. And publishing is really tough. I mean, there is this illusion right now that publishing is easy because there's self-publishing and there are all these different avenues for getting work out there. But in reality, publishing is still very, very tough. It's hard to get something that you've written into other people's hands. And so going through it myself and having tried to get the seed published, it took me a decade to get the seed published because I couldn't get people interested. I couldn't find an agent. It was a really tough sell. You know, a collection of short stories that were, you know, fantasy, horror, you know, magical realism, and they were like mainly all Latino young people's protagonists. So knowing how hard it is to make that happen, I just feel a debt to my community, to the writers in my community, to try to provide a venue for them as much as I possibly can. And it was a little bit easier earlier on than it is now, but with in alliances with other writers who feel the same way, I'm able to continue providing that kind of support. And you know, VAO Publishing has morphed into two different imprints now: Flower Song Books and Juventud Press. And together with Renee Saldana and Erica Garza Johnson and Jay Melendez, you know, we're moving forward with that, you know, that search for good projects from the Rio Grande Valley that deserve to be out in front of people and making that happen for people. So,
Well, I think there's different projects that one does, particularly as an editor, for different reasons. So I'll just talk very briefly about Windows into My World, Latino Youth Write Their Lives. When I was teaching at the University of Houston, my first big name faculty creative writing appointment, I had a dream, a feeling that undergraduates, college undergraduates, could write very complex and compelling literary memoir. So memories whose source was, writing whose source was memory. And that was not the standard feeling in the literature or academic literature or creative writing programs at all. They thought you had to be old, like whatever, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, to write very complex and compelling memoirs. So luckily I had a chairman who would listen, and I went to him and I said, I can put together a memoir course with the readings heavily in the Mexican-American historical framework, and I can teach undergraduates to write creative writing. And he said, if the dean approves it, I'll give you permission to teach that course. And I taught that course for 5 or 6 years, and after the first semester, the writing, which was so compelling, so heartfelt, so engaging, that I went to the gentleman who was my publisher at the time, and I said, if I can put together a manuscript of memoir written by high school and Latino youth, will you read the manuscript? And from a publisher, a commitment to even just read a manuscript is a huge deal, because they get hundreds, and of course the big guys get thousands of manuscripts a year. They don't have time to read it. They don't care if it starts getting good on page 50, because if you don't have them by the first paragraph or the first 3 pages, they won't continue. So I did that project because I so much believed in the writing that my students were doing, and it ultimately became a nationwide project. You Don't Have a Clue, Latino Mystery Stories for Teens. I did this anthology, which includes a short story of my own, but of many, many other Latino, all the authors are Latino. I did this anthology because nobody in the world had ever put together an anthology of short mystery fiction written by Hispanic authors. And I thought, it needs to be done. I've been reading mystery since I was, like 10 years old, 12 years old. Let's hear from these authors. Now, in terms of helping other people out, I think I do that more than I actually write my own. I mean, it's crazy, but even though I'm a full-time writer, I mostly don't write. I mostly edit or, do all the things involved for traveling, and I travel every week. So I would say, just because I'm a workaholic, which I realize, there is no balance in my life. I mean, I work almost 7 days a week, usually 6.5. I take off Sunday morning for church, but I work 6.5 days a week. I teach 2 nights a week. I travel one to 2 times every week in the spring and fall, and that's how it is. But I love what I'm doing, so yeah, it's all good.
So, you know how when you're a grown-up, right? Like a grown-up is like a 15-year-old kid. You're 15, and you see some little kid, some 6-year-old kid trying to ride a bike, or a 5-year-old kid. Your instincts are to help that kid. I mean, it's a really good feeling to help a kid ride a bike. And the kid's trying to ride a bicycle, he keeps on falling, you go back and you hold the bike, and you push him off, and you help him. It is our natural instinct as humans to help each other out. It really is. Yeah. And I think as writers, or painters, or teachers, or parents, you want to help someone do better. So this idea of helping people is not, I don't think, like, yay, way to go. No, you should be doing that. You should be helping others get ahead. It's not I don't think it should be rewarded or applauded or congratulated. That's what you should be doing. And as writers up here, I only know one writer, one Mexican writer who's a jerk. The rest are fantastic. The rest are really nice. And I've never seen a Mexican writer or a teacher or a writer in general turn away another writer. And we need each other. So this idea of if you want to be a writer, listen, it can be done. It really can. And you get a library for it. You've got books for it. There's all kinds of stuff on the internet for it. But best of all, these guys are really accessible. You email them and they'll respond.
Yeah.
So I think it's our natural instinct to help others, and I'm really happy with it. It's a really good feeling to go to a book festival and see a bunch of local writers. And I don't think we're competitive either. There's no competition here. There really isn't. I mean, I don't think it's time for that kind of stuff. It's just about working together and helping others, and it's good to see others succeed. So I think it's our natural instinct to help each other, and it's fun overall, right? I think it's fun.
Awesome.
Let's hear, that's very inspirational. Let's hear from a question or a comment from a reader in the audience.
Anybody? Questions?
Hey, there's some guys here who were forced to come here from college.
I know.
Yeah. So you guys were forced to be here.
No.
You need to ask a question, or I'll tell your professor you need to ask a question. We'll get you in trouble. So I know for a fact there's 2 kids up there who were forced to come here. So let's hear a question from those who were forced. Let's hear it. I'm looking at you right now. So ask the question. Yeah, go ahead.
What are the latest projects that you've been working on?
Okay. Since you pushed
There's
them,
this girl I'm chasing. She's amazing. Let's go after her. She's fantastic.
creative project,
Yeah,
creative,
project.
and that's a creative project.
Oh, that's a creative. A lot of stuff, man. A lot of stuff. I mean, you should always be working on something, right? I mean, yeah.
It's almost next to impossible for me to have time to work on any of the bigger projects because of editors who request smaller items, like a poem or a short story. I mean, it can take me 6 or 7 months or 3 months to write a 3,000-word short story. So I can barely keep up with the people who request my work. And I'm still struggling to I have 2 book proposals in process that I want to get contracts on. So I don't know. I feel like I'm like the little squirrel in the cage all the time.
But I think your projects, look, at home, when you're doing a project, right? Let's say you're doing a garden, or you're fixing your garage, or you're fixing your kitchen, or whatever. Each project helps the next project.
Yeah.
So if you stop one project, and so I'll finish that later, and you go to the garden to work on the garden, while you're doing the garden, you go, I got an idea for the kitchen. Now, you got to complete these projects, of course, but I think everything we do feeds back into other things. None of it's lost, I don't think.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
But to kind of give you guys a picture of what it looks like, so you can, because they're driven insane by it, and I get it, and so am I. But so you can see, you're lay people, so you can understand. So right now, I am working on edits on a short story collection that's going to come out in February from Broken River Books, and it's called Chupacabra Vengeance. It's not young adults. They're adult science fiction, fantasy, horror short stories. So that book was written, it was submitted, it was accepted. And now we did some initial edits. Now we're doing some revision. So I'm getting the editor sending me stuff, and I'm working on it and sending it back to him. At the same time, I'm writing the 2nd book of the Garza Twin series, and that's under contract to be turned in at the end of this month. So I'm getting up at 4 o'clock every morning going, oh my God. I've got half the book left, and so I'm working on that. I write from about 4 o'clock in the morning till about 6:30, wake my son up, iron my clothes and get ready for work, and then in the evening I look back over what I've done, and on Saturdays and Sundays I write for about 4 hours. And then, as soon as that's done, I've already started having meetings with the illustrator for the book that I'm under contract with for the History Press, which is called Ghosts of the Rio Grande Valley. And I've got to turn that manuscript in March, because it's coming out in September. And so he's got to have all the illustrations done by February. And I haven't written a single word of it, but I've got this. I know the haunted places that we're going to be writing
It's
about,
all
stuff
in
like
my
that.
head, David. Just say it. It's all in my head, right?
So I'm meeting with him, giving him the list of the haunted sites, because he's also taking photographs, and so you don't know whether you're coming or going. And then I've like Sarah, I also have book proposals for a couple other books that I'm sending out, and as they're rejected, I'm repackaging them, sending them off elsewhere, and so it's complicated, and you feel like a juggler, and you've got all these things, and they're coming down and you're like throwing them back up in the air. But I wouldn't have it any other way. I mean, it's kind of torturous, but it's a lot of fun at the same time. And I'm like her, I'm a workaholic. I love, if I didn't have something going on every moment of every day except when I'm asleep, I would be like, well, this is boring.
Yeah, and here's the other thing, sorry.
Yeah, I'm done.
Is that some people, and all of us, and probably many of you, or most of you, are in love with the act of writing. You're in love with the creative fountain that comes out of the spirit or heart or soul or wherever it comes. And you have to have that. I mean, if writing isn't a burning passion, forget it. You know, go do something else that's a burning passion. And that's the source of everything. All this energy, all this fire, all this creative juice. But your publishers are depending on you as a writer or editor to market the books. Your publishers the publishers don't have tons of money sitting around in buckets to give away. In fact, most publishers, especially legitimate publishers, are barely making it. I mean, if they were running a car, they probably wish they were running the car repair shop down at the end of all of our blocks, because they'd be making more money, right? An auto mechanic makes more money than the publishers, right? So the publishers depend on all of us to do things, to market our books, to attend book signings, to go to book festivals, to try to get book reviews, to talk to other people, to do this, to do that.
And it eats into our time for
and so it's not uncommon to sit down at your computer in the morning and spend the first 2 to 3 to 4, maybe half the day just doing, you know, the administrative stuff. So I'm very happy. I had a 14-year corporate career before I went into police work and became a blue-collar worker. But
Isn't that weird?
I'm so happy for my business, career, because it taught me project management. So it's the last book I did had almost 50 poets. Well, let me tell you, poets, trying to get poets to do something is like trying to herd chickens. I mean, they, you know, as soon as you say do this, they run in every other opposite direction. You know, they're very just innately gifted that way. And so, you know, you and I'm sure with you, you need project management skills. You need to be able to keep track of who's done what, who's late for the deadline, keep track of your own deadlines, and so forth.
Yeah. Very cool.
Sorry, that was a long question.
Have any of you read Michener's The Novel?
I'm sorry?
James Michener?
Yeah.
The novel?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay. It has a very interesting description of what it's like getting published in there.
I haven't read that. What's it like?
Go back and go, you know, it's Michener, okay,
Right.
it's a good read. It's not, it's not high literature, but it's a darn good read. And I generally read old stuff because I leave the public to have the new stuff because they're paying for it. But I find it extremely interesting, and it gives you as you were saying, the publishers have practically no money, and he explains that in there and how it really works, and how the term over the transom.
Right.
What happens to the over the transom books, and how they're winnowed out by some editor who's rather low on the totem pole, who has to open it up, take a quick look, and they use Yiddish terms, dreck, and all that goes in the dreck pile. And if your authors want your stuff back, send the postage.
Yeah.
Because they don't have the money to send it back.
Yeah. And now, obviously when Mitcher was writing the novel, things were a little bit different. So, but it is essentially the same system, just electronic now. That's a slush pile editor, and those are the lower people on the totem pole. They're the ones responsible for making sure that the stuff that's just not passable doesn't even make it to somebody who's going to seriously consider. Because, as Sarah mentioned earlier, I mean, a New York publisher gets thousands of manuscripts a year, thousands.
But then you have to consider why you're writing. And this is important. Look, just because you publish a book doesn't make you a writer. It just doesn't. There's a lot of bad books out there.
Yeah, that's true.
Just because you got a book published does not make you an author or a writer. It doesn't. And so if your intent when you're writing is the fame and the money and whatever, then you're in the wrong place. You really are. And the idea when I write my stories, I don't think about it getting published. I write it, I have a good time with it, it goes out, it gets accepted, that's great. But that was never the first intent. Will someone like this? Will I like it? That's my name on it. So the idea of writing, Michener, whoever it is, it doesn't matter who the author is, you have to write because you like to write. And if it just winds up in a cabinet or in a box at your house, and your grandkids come upon it, or your nephews or nieces, and they go, what's this? You go, oh yeah, so-and-so wrote that 20 years ago, and they're inspired by that, then boom, you've done it. Because really it's not about, I just don't understand this idea of people wanting to be famous through writing. It just seems kind of weird to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I get acting because you're using your face and your body, but the written word shouldn't have a face to it. It should just be this beautiful written word. And so you guys who are writers, and you get rejected, it doesn't mean anything. Like you said, all these, and my house was a big house, random house, and I was with Penguin Buckingham, and it doesn't mean anything. So someone says, I don't like it, that's just one person. There's 7 billion people on the planet.
Yeah.
So don't be focused on this writing stuff like they're going to hate it or going to get accepted. Because if that's your intent, then you're going to write a really bad story or a bad essay or a bad script or a bad screenplay. Just write, yeah.
What you're getting to in a way, when you said, you're not promoting yourself, you're trying to write something. In the United States particularly, in libraries, the primary, back in the old card catalog days, the primary card was the author card, because we consider the human being to be more important. In many other places in the world, it's the title.
Yeah.
Because the work itself has precedence over the person who wrote it. Now, in our way of thinking, of course, you can go down everything the writer has written and you can more easily access it that way. And the other way, presumably the title is descriptive, which often isn't anymore.
No.
You find stuff that way. Of course, now with computerization, it's all open. But the philosophical background of how you organize things, follows in a way what you're saying. It's one way versus the other. Another one, change back to the previous thing I mentioned. Have you ever read one of the biographies of Faulkner and how he got himself published? In the back of the closet, he had a matrix. Down one side of it, he had all of the things that he wrote. On the other thing, he had all the major publishers that he was sending it to. And he'd send something out to publisher A, and it would come back, he'd exit off and send it to publisher B. And he did that with all his work, so he would never send the same thing to the same publisher until he started, getting famous and getting published.
That's what I do with but I do it on an Excel sheet instead of like a thing.
And I would like to go back for a minute to something David said, because I just think it's so important and really agree with it, which is I'm trying to think what the best word is, maybe the integrity and the fire and the just passion that you have, that you apply to your own work. And so part of that is that you have that interest, you want to be that writer, and then I think maybe, we'll see if David agrees or not, he may not, I think we're all, those of us who are serious about writing, are gradually fine-tuning. I know what I thought was a good short story X number of years ago when in 1987, when I started taking a course, a beginning fiction course, is very different from what I think a good short story is now. And maybe it's different even from what I thought a good short story was 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And so we have that initial, yes, you should, if your name is on something, it's just like you must be proud of it. You must feel that it has the integrity of the vision that you feel works for the whole. But you're always, I think, fine-tuning and hopefully increasingly becoming knowledgeable and intuitive about your craft, the craft of writing.
Well, the fine-tuning, it goes back to, okay, look, when you're writing, it's not a race. There's no clock on this. There's no deadline, really. the deadlines are when you send it out, right, for contract, but when you write, there's no deadline, there's no clock on this. The fine-tuning thing is important. It's all about the rewrites. It might take 3 or 4 or 5 years to write one short story, the first one you write, or the first essay or the first play. So what? That's not how long it took. Was it done or not? When someone reads a story, they go, well, how long does it take to write? They never ask me that. That might take them 3 years to write. That's not the issue. So the idea of fine-tuning is very important because you'll write something, you put it away for a few months, come back to it when you're in the mood, do it again, walk away, and just keep on doing that, but don't walk away from it entirely. So this idea of writing, there's many ways to do it, but the first thing you have to understand, it's not a race. It's just not.
Well, and that goes back to what you were saying about these two different types of authors, the one who enjoys being a writer and the one who enjoys writing. And if you enjoy writing, you're going to take your time and you're going to do what needs to be done to tell the story or write the poem that needs to be told or needs to be written. And this other thing, the public sphere of it, the being a writer and all the accoutrements and recognition and so forth that come with it, that's secondary. I mean, there are very few people who don't enjoy that to some extent. But if that's your primary focus, then you probably shouldn't be a writer. You should just stay away from it.
But it's also fun to go back to your work and look at it and go, hey, look what I've written and how far I've gotten. And then, show it to your mom and dad, your parents, your friends, they read it. You go, hey, it's gotten better. Yeah, it's gotten better.
I remember when you started out, it wasn't all that great.
It's crap. It's crap. Of course it's crap. It's the first draft.
Yes.
So is there something that's been published that you wish was never published?
Of our own?
Of your own? That you look back and you're like, oh.
No, I mean, it can take me 7 years to write a poem. And I keep it. If every single breath and word is not right in that poem, I mean, I have stacks and stacks of paper, right? I mean, stacks and stacks. Because I don't trust a computer, because computers get stolen, computers go in, they do all the crazy stuff, they blow up, But, so no, sorry, go ahead, let me pass
No,
the
I'm not.
baton.
Oh, no, oh, yeah, no, there's nothing, I mean, if something gets published, it's because someone other than you thought it was worthwhile. And so even though there are things that I've written that I wouldn't write that way anymore, I don't feel embarrassed about any of it because it spoke to somebody thought it was worthwhile. And at the end of the day, I mean, as a writer, you should be about the writing, but you're also about the audience. And so the most important thing after writing is your readership and having people be able to connect with and for you to be a conduit for whatever it is that needs to be said or felt, so that person connects with it. So if even one person connected with something that I've written and wanted to publish it, then who am I to say it shouldn't have been published?
Okay, so yes. Everyone's stuff but I think that how when you go to a dance, you're dancing, and you're a really bad dancer, and like I'm a bad dancer. So you're out there dancing, and you're terrible. You're a terrible dancer. And people are watching you, and they're like, that guy is terrible, He doesn't know how to lead. He does turns in the wrong sound in the song. But then one person will go like, oh yeah, but you look like you're having a lot of fun. You're not the best dancer, but you look like you're having a lot of fun. So that goes back to when you write, you may not be the best dancer, and you're not, but someone out there actually likes the way you dance. They like that style because they're having a good time. And so you're writing, you can be critical about it, but like David said, you write it, put your work into it, and maybe it's not your best story, but someone likes it. Yeah. So there's some value there, right? You may not like it, like, well, I'm not the best dancer, but well, I like the way you dance. Okay. So there's that fine line between, because if you go like, oh, well, it's a stupid story, then you're discounting the reader, and someone says, well, I actually like that story. And so it's a fine line. Now, I've written stuff I can improve on. If I can go back 20 years, I can fix that story and make it better. But, hey, man, that's the moment, right? So leave it alone.
Talking about fixing things.
Sir, I'm sorry, there's a question behind you. A person's had their hand raised. Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is actually for David Bowles, but for all of you. I read your poetry and I really enjoyed it.
Thanks.
And one of your books. And one thing I noticed about it is, as you mentioned in your introduction, you come from a mixed cultural background.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things I enjoy about some of the poems, especially you kind of mentioned, especially growing up, how being in this mixed world, it affected your writing, and I can see how it affects it today. And maybe you could just kind of comment on how giving these different outlooks kind of affected you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I remember really vividly, and I talked a little bit about this in my TED Talk, being in Progreso with my dad. We used to go across the border to Progreso when I was a kid to buy, Coke and to fill up on gas. You guys remember what it used to be like in the late 70s, early 80s. It was just a very different world, as the great collection that Sarah published kind of gets to the heart of. And my dad was pumping gas, or I guess the Pemex attendant was pumping gas. He was talking to him in Spanish, ¿Qué tal, cómo estás? Da, 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 da. And he got in the car and we were driving off, little joyas rattling in the trunk. And I said, Dad, what's up with us? How, look, all my cousins' last name was Casas, Garza, Perez. You speak Spanish. You're clearly not Anglo. You're brown as mahogany. And what's the deal with this? Why is my last name Bowles? I mean, I know my mom's Anglo. And he said, look, don't get hung up on all of that stuff. I mean, I can explain it all to you, and you can see the ins and outs, all the crazy stuff that happened in our family for us to end up the way we are. But what should matter to you is not so much whether you're Anglo or Hispanic or whatever. We are border folk, he said. This is the phrase that he used, border folk. And our bloodlines have crossed and recrossed this boundary for generations. And we're not from here or from there. We're from this in-between place. And take what you can from every culture around you, and enjoy the Latino heritage that you have, enjoy the Anglo heritage you have, forge something special for yourself. Know that you are both part of the fabric of the larger community and separate from it as well. And I mean, that was a really interesting lesson to learn. And I took the whole individuality thing more seriously because I was a young teenager and I was kind of a rebel without a cause. And it wasn't until I became a teacher working with struggling readers that I began to take the other side, the community aspect, as seriously as well. And so it's about that balance between being an individual who is defined by his own work and his own thoughts and his own philosophy, and being a member of a community and being influenced by the culture and mores of the people around you. So it's a weird balance to strike. Poetry is a really great place to explore that kind of. It's almost like a paradox. Identity is.
And I will say, for many years of having taught at the University of Houston, which, like most universities, is this thriving hotbed of left-wing activity. That one of the dynamics that disturbs me a lot, and I worry about a lot, is that I see people of color, both brown and black, adopting rhetoric of hatred against white people. And I cannot tell you how many times I've been at Latino Letters conferences, and of course there's children in the room, so I'm not going to use the language that I hear, but saying extremely, highly prejudicial, highly hateful things about white people. And so, I feel that one of the great benefits of growing up in the family I did, which was, we had, white people, but we were mostly Hispanic, mostly of Spanish descent and American Indian descent, or it's now called Native American descent. And because of the faith I grew up in, which was Catholic, we were taught that everybody was the same, that this skin is just a cover-up. And I've been to plenty of autopsies as a police officer, so I know what it looks like when you take the skin off of people, and we're all red meat underneath. So I just refuse to adopt the rhetoric of hatred against people of XYZ colors or this or that or whatever, because I think we all should be here for human beings. And so I really applaud people like David, who can, you know, are the writers who can reach out in the humanness that we all shared, and it's a flawed human situation because we're all flawed. I mean, sometimes we have short tempers, sometimes we're grouchy, sometimes we're impatient, sometimes we're frustrated, whatever the heck. And reach out. I mean, I'm here for all writers. I got in a sort of tough spot earlier this year by someone who is Latino, is very successful, and he wanted me to be just for Latino writers. That's it, period, just for Latino writers. And I had to tell him, well, no, I'm here for every writer. I have clients that are in 3rd grade. I have clients that are in their mid-80s. I have clients with traumatic brain injury. I have clients of every single color under the rainbow, and I'm here for them all.
But going back to the Bowles being half white or whatever, me white or whatever, the important thing is to tap into your culture. This guy's writing a book about Aztec gods as the danger. No one's done that. I got my degree in English with anthropology with a concentration in Mayan and Olmec studies, right, in Aztec. So when he said, yeah, I'm doing this book using the Aztec gods as the evil people, as opposed to the Greek gods, that hasn't been done in literature. So it's important that if you are a border folk in this region, you can't push away from your cultural identity. Faulkner didn't do that, Flannery O'Connor didn't do that, Shakespeare didn't do that. The list goes on. You have to maximize the region you're from. So to me, being Mexican-American is very important because that culture has so much to offer as far as folklore and story mythology.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredibly, and it hasn't been tapped really. I mean, we're just starting to. I mean, there's dozens of Aztec gods, there's hundreds of them, and Olmec gods and Mayan. And so, by no means push away against your identity, because I, on the other hand, am very big about writing for that community, because it's so not told yet, and there's so much to tap into. So, you can choose your audiences, I suppose, but I'm not going to turn my back on my culture because it's just got too much to offer as far as a writer goes.
And the cool thing is that you can, like in writing The Smoking Mirror, I wanted to write a book that was for Latino young people that would have, and not all the Aztec gods are villains, there's some good guys too, but the primary bad guys are, Aztec gods. And I wanted the book to be something that, like, Latinos could see themselves in, but I also wanted to be a book that's accessible to Anglo students, to African American students, to Native American students, to anybody, so that there would be, in just the same way that Latino students are reading, Percy Jackson, Harry Potter, and stuff like that, and enjoying the heck out of it, I want these, kids from other demographics to be able to read this book. And so there's nothing like deliberately, derogatory of other cultures while simultaneously celebrating a culture that perhaps isn't celebrated as much. And so I think we can balance this, and I think that Sarah and David, both in their own ways, do balance that. You've got all kinds of Anglo and African American students throughout the states reading the short stories that David's written, my tocayo over here, and I think it's really fantastic. So we can do both. I think we can fill in the gaps that exist in the canon for that don't represent Hispanics, while simultaneously making that work accessible to people from other groups, so that they admire and learn to they come to understand the culture that we come from and find something that they can identify within it. The universal human things that should be in all literature, because as Sarah was putting in a very stark physical way, we do share commonalities because we're all human beings. Our brains are structured the same way. Our internal organs are structured the same way. Culture is a very important part of our psyche, but there are also innate things that all human beings have as just by virtue of being human beings.
This is an enlightening conversation. And another question from our reader was, ma'am in the back, yes?
This is on a lighter note, but
Please.
do you have any rituals that you do to, as a writer, to get inspired? Any working rituals?
Working rituals.
How do you, if you have a blank, you just don't know where to go?
Well, I guess I'll talk about my rituals, and then Everybody's got different ones. So I need to write when people are not bugging me, basically. And so I get up super early, as I've mentioned. And so my main ritual is like this big cup of coffee to help me get myself awake. And so turning that computer on, reading through the last couple pages of what I've written, and then just diving in. Because I'll tell you one thing, I do not believe in writer's block. Especially not for fiction. With fiction, you just write. Because as David Rice has said, you fix that stuff in editing and revision, but you've got to get those words on the page. And so you have to set a goal for yourself. So I'm like, I'm going to write from 4 to 6:30. That's 2.5 hours. I will write 1,000 words by the end of that. And they may be 1,000 sucky words, but I will write 1,000 words. And I do. 1,000 words I can set myself to do. When I'm in the middle of a project like this, the sequel to this book is 65,000 words long. Written over the course of 2 months, that comes out to 1,000 words a day. Now, sometimes I won't be able to. Sometimes my wife will get up earlier and decide that she wants to come sit in my office and talk to me, and I'm like, okay, there goes those 1,000 words. So, and then I'll also have to make it up the next day, and I'm like, you came in and we had a great conversation, honey, but now I need to take another hour in the evening to. So I just do it. Poetry is a different story, though. Poetry, you can force poetry, but it's going to be of inferior quality. Poetry, you've got to feel that there's something that needs to be said, something that you've got to grapple with that can only be grappled with through poetry, and you've got to kind of like feel that. When you try to force that, and I have, like she's talking about, when you get like a request, we want you to.
You've got to by this date.
Yeah, we want you to contribute a poem, and you want to be in that anthology, but you're like, holy moly, I have no poem. Que voy a hacer? And so then you're like, okay, revisit some of the scraps of paper that have stuff written on. So to me, that's just getting up and when everybody else is asleep, the house is silent. Maybe the cats are being a little annoying, but other than that, cup of coffee, computer. Boom, I just go to town.
Yeah, I think silence is really important, and that includes turning the cell phone off, not answering the doorbell, and if you have a landline, taking the receiver off the hook and putting a pillow over it.
And not having Facebook open.
You just don't, we don't get a gentle breeze of information anymore. We get a tornado of information and interruptions every single day, every one of us. And if you're going to be creative in whatever field, you can't be creative with all that. So I need silence. I only write creatively in bed. I do not write creatively at a desk. At a desk, I do work. I edit, I respond to emails, I do all this other stuff. The only place I write creatively is in bed, period, that's it. And if I need to lay down and...
That's intimate, isn't it?
Well, no, I'm not saying I'm naked.
Oh, all right. I was visualizing what's going on there.
No, you can be fully clothed
I knew
in bed.
It was a bad idea to put the two of them on the same stage together.
The bed is made up.
Yes.
You're on top of the bed with pillows and a clipboard. I write everything by hand at least the first...
That's the thing, because she writes by hand. I can't write by hand. I knew it was a mistake to get them next to each other on a panel.
I write everything by hand at least the first 10 drafts, and if I'm working on a short story...
Really?
For real.
Wow.
For real. Even if it's like a 3,000 or 4,000 word short story, and I have to fiddle around with just a few places, I still rewrite the whole thing by longhand, because you get the rhythm of the prose in your blood, and it's different. And I learned that from my first creative writing teacher.
That's good.
He's like, she's crazy.
Hey, whatever works.
Yeah, everybody could do
Yeah, I have ADHD. When I write,
We
I have
couldn't have
TV on,
noticed.
I've got a stereo on, I write, people are around me, I have no rituals, I don't get up at 4 in the morning, I come in at 4 in the morning from going out.
But are you
But you're not writing at that point.
I'm in bed, I'm very creative in bed. And so, that is my thing, no rituals. And I know that authors say you get up in the morning and write no matter what until 1 o'clock and then whatever, man. I don't do that. Okay, I have a laptop and I write where I can, when I can. Like I'm going home today back to Austin. I'll probably stop at one of those rest stops, and I'll take my laptop out and sit out there, watch trucks go by, and do a little bit of writing.
Unless it's raining, dude.
And then close and go back. And that's how I write. So I don't have a ritual. But I think it's important to have that, if you can, pero,
Yep,
I mean.
this is so you can get, see every writer's different.
Yeah, I've never had original.
And by the way, writer's block does not exist.
That's true. That's
We
what I
just
said.
figured out, we
Yeah,
all agreed
it's-
with each
it's
other.
below.
I mean,
On one thing.
whatever you do, people make scads of money publishing a book about how to get over writer's block. But if you, as a would-be writer, read that book, you're going to start believing writer's block exists. So don't do it. It's like reading a book on tropical diseases, right? You read that book and you're like,
You suddenly get 'em
I've
all,
got a
yeah.
little thing going on over here. I wonder if that's like the worm from Brazil,
Yeah.
you know.
You know what I get? I get grass cutting block. Like I just can't cut the grass. I mean, I don't know. I look at it, it needs to be cut, and I can't do it.
And how are you?
Talk to you
Beth?
about
No, my wife, and that's what I'm getting at. My wife goes, ya, olvídate de tus tonterías y te me sales a cortar la yarda ya. And that's the way you have to be with your own self. You're like, ya, déjate de tonterías y ponte a escribir.
Okay, for those of us who don't speak
My wife tells
Spanish,
me, forget about this, whatever laziness you have, get your butt out there and cut the grass. And I think that's what we should be telling our own minds,
Yeah.
just cut it out and write.
Make nonfiction interesting for you to read and to like when you're writing it yourselves. How do you make it exciting?
What type of
Nonfiction, just like essays.
What type, like memoir or essay or science or biography or memoir or?
Like about a particular community, perhaps? You're writing about a community?
So more like expository, like essay kind of pieces, yeah. Well, I think that the number one thing that I do, like for my top shelf column, the book review column I do, is to try to like infuse it with a little bit of my personality. Voice is important. People are going to be reading it. If all you do is just give them the facts and you don't have any kind of flavor to it, then they're going to be bored unless they're kind of weird. And some people like just to read like technical manuals or whatever. But your average reader who's just picking up like, an essay on a community or whatever, they're going to want a little bit of flavor, a little bit of voice. You need to have some quirkiness in your little, the little things that you do as a writer. Just be sure to make it yours. If it sounds like it could have been written by anybody, then it's likely boring, in my opinion.
And it's journalism. In that case, it's journalism.
Yeah.
Because
And that
who
needs to
wrote
be
it
short.
doesn't matter at
Yeah,
all.
yeah.
But it also, I think, would be highly dependent upon audience, meaning who your readership's going to be. Because that, what you don't want is a book that sachets between historical document, dramatic novel, and something else. I mean, where you mix a bunch of different tones and a bunch of different approaches to the material. Because then people start expecting one thing, and then all of a sudden you get two paragraphs of something else. So depending upon your readership, then you go for consistency of tone, which is what you're talking about.
Right.
Anyway, sorry.
I think we're done.
This has been an amazing panel. I'm very grateful for all of you for being here and for asking questions. And we must have a round of applause for our wonderful panelists.
Thank you.